Hello. Hello. I'm going to talk about my. How are y'all? Good. Tonight, we are here to celebrate one of our visual artists through our spotlight exhibition series and her installation GR is deeply and deeply learned philosophy, an incredible installation artist. We're wondering and curious why we created this series to provide folks without institutional access to time and space and resources to play. So GR is one of five artists selected in our last show of the year. Our biggest installation that we've ever done. And each artist brought something to the table. We're so incredible. We have a lot of engagement online, so we are live streaming the event tonight. We got like tons of questions from folks on our digital audience, and one of them was about if this series is going to continue next year. It is. We are bringing on 4 artists next year to support with stipends, professional development, installation space, and crew. And you can follow us at any number of podcasts to learn more about all that. The bathrooms are through the arches, just for housekeeping. There's food and drinks. We always like to tell folks that this is not a classroom. You don't have to stay seated like you're in a lecture. Nobody's going to yell at you. You move at the pace of your body, and obviously there's a lot of sights to be seen. This artwork, at least from my experience, I don't want to talk too much, but I was like in here the other day, and I laid on the floor and looked up at it from this angle, and every angle gives you something new. So I'm just really excited to introduce our artist tonight, and I'm going to read their artist biography. I'm more than a product. I'm more than a ticked box. I'm more than a BIPOC. I'm not captured by capitalism. I'm not crossed by consumerism. I won't be cornered for compliance or convenience. I'm 5D commodified, contrary to the high ground I refuse to lose. I am Memphis, irrepressibly overflowing, contaminating, confounding, controlled by gravity, subverting aversion to my very existence, preventing your attempts to forget. Like a persistent, lingering sediment, elusively suffusing through crevices, I reject the limits of narrative, living forever in transgressive gloom, insistently repeated. Or in other words, as framed by critical identity.
Thank you guys so much for coming. I am so honored. I think for the live stream, it's better that I use the microphone. So the point of this discussion, I really want it to be a conversation, a dialogue. I originally intended to have a conversation about like entering and engaging with contemporary and conceptual art because it tends to be a little bit mystifying and sometimes intimidating for people. So I'm really hoping that you might have questions or even stories to share about times that you've attempted to look at art and you felt confused. And I think together in a conversation we can talk about like ways, strategies, techniques of looking at this art, engaging with it, and feeling more comfortable with it. So the first thing that I'd like to do is ask if anyone has anything they'd like to share or any questions, like, you know, why do artists do things like this, or why does art get presented this way and I don't get it, and it's, you know, sometimes I feel I feel dumb or I feel like I'm going to get judged. So if anyone has anything to share or anything to ask, I would love to start off with that. Otherwise, I can start with my own topic. But does anyone have any burning things to share or ask? Yes. Yes. Great question. And great way of starting, because if no one asked that question, that's how I was going to start. Like, how do we actually start? How do you walk into, hey, Lauren, can we have a microphone over here? Thank you. For the live stream, if anyone didn't quite hear the question is about how do we start, especially in an installation. Where is the starting point? How do you start to quote unquote enter the work? So in an installation like mine, it's really anywhere at any point. Sometimes venues and institutions, whether it's a museum or a gallery, they will plan ahead of time, like ways to, they'll design the actual exhibition. There's exhibition designers, like that's a whole job you can do. Or if it's just a small gallery, maybe they just have some staff. But there's a lot of pre-planning often that goes into how to make you navigate through a space. If there is like a starting point, and then having folks move through in a desired sequence. Otherwise, my intention was for this to be pretty open and just have people start, enter wherever. So it really depends on the exhibition, but sometimes you'll be able to tell if someone is sort of directing you, or if there's signs or little hints and clues about where to go. So sometimes once you go into a space, if you kind of pay attention to those things, if you're looking for those things, if you see people who look like staff and you wanna ask, like I went to an exhibition at the Nasher with these fine folks, and one of the gallery staff, I was asking about like their opinion of the work of the exhibition, and they were a little bit surprised. Like, oh, you want my opinion? But yeah, you've been looking at it, you've been working with it, you've been, surely as someone who's interested in the arts, you have some kind of interpretation. Like, I'd like to get your take to kind of guide me and help me think about this, because I'm just coming into it brand new and you've been looking at it. So yeah, take advantage of the staff that's there and ask. And if you want to pointedly ask, like, well, where should I start? They'll probably have some kind of opinion on even if there isn't a starting point, like what they would suggest, what they like. It was really interesting for me to start over here, and then when I saw that, and then later I saw this part, and then I made a connection, and it was really interesting. So yeah, ask the staff, or maybe ask your fellow visitors, like, hey, like, where did you start? Like, was that interesting? I don't know. Engage with the people around you as well. That's another piece of advice. Like, folks who are all in the same space, interested in art, like, often are enthusiastic about communicating about it. So you can talk to folks too. So that was a great question. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Any stories to share? Like, does this generate any ideas of times that you've gone to a gallery, a museum, and is there any experiences you want to share? Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Microphone.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I mean, one, because it's like such a it's a tactile kind of exhibition. So I don't know if this is on. So actually, like, not having to resist the temptation and being able to touch it was really refreshing
Mm-hmm.
to me.
Yeah, great, thank you. I find sometimes that folks feel nervous when they're invited to touch, because we're so conditioned to think like, oh no, you shouldn't, and then I'm going to break it, and then you're going to charge me, $1 million. Yeah, I really want my practice to be a place, and when people are engaging, feel a little bit more freedom, feel a little bit more confidence, engaging with all the different senses. I do intentionally want to make art that is accessible in a lot of different ways. So, for folks who might be sight impaired and maybe you don't see the full depth and breadth of the installation, well, there's all these other ways that you can engage. Right now, just because we're recording and I'm talking, I do have a soundscape also that's included in this installation. So that's another way, that you can use a different sense. I have tried in the past to put scented like spices and things that maybe you can smell. It was an experiment that didn't pan out. Sometimes that happens. So I'm still working on how to incorporate that kind of thing without doing something like incense. Like I still want it to feel artistic and not like I just dropped a scented candle in the middle of things. But that's part of my practice, is always thinking through how people will move through the installation, but then how can they physically engage as well as like mentally engage. I also think I've got hands all over here, and there's something about the symbolism of where this inspiration came from, and I don't know if you recognize or if it jogs any memories or of things you might have seen, but in a lot of ancient caves there are handprints like this that are made with like pigments that have been blown out of the mouth. So like ancient human beings would go over and over to the same caves, and often in like tunnels where you have to spend some time like actually getting to a large room where you then put your handprint. Basically, as anthropologists have posited, as a way of saying like I was here. This is I made the journey, I made the trek, and this is evidence of that. And so I feel like I'm attempting to continue that sort of legacy of like going into spaces and touching and feeling and kind of leaving a mark. So in a lot of ways, if I didn't let people touch, it just feels too restrictive and too limiting. So that's why I make some of these particular choices, and it's understandable that other artists would not. So I'm not saying that any other artist making the choice like please don't touch my work is somehow too restrictive. But with my practice, I'm really trying to push some of the boundaries that exist in the art industry, as well as like art practice, to really try to like get people thinking about boundaries and about systems, structures, things that are constructed in our lives, our societies, our cultures. Sometimes we don't think about what is actually constructing the culture, the society, and are those things good, bad? How do they affect people? Like right now, with the development of all these new technologies, things like social media, AI, like how is that going to affect our social structures? And what are those social structures? And what are the consequences going to be? So even though I do things in like this very artistic way, part of the idea of me pushing boundaries and kind of trying to break some of the known and conditioned structures of how do you experience an art exhibit. It's not just about pushing the boundaries of art, but it's about pushing the boundaries of like our social connections and our social structures. And I can do that personally through my art practice, and other people can do that in the ways that they do, activism or in whatever field they are. They can think critically about the structures and the systems that they're under, and then talk about those things. So this is my vehicle for doing that, and that's a lot of talking. So I'd like some more talking from y'all. Hopefully you're maybe generating more ideas. Did we have questions from online? Okay, let's answer some questions.
Someone was talking about your discussion of boundaries, and you said something earlier about things being really expensive and people don't want to break them. So the question was, do traditional galleries create a safe home for your work?
Oh, so this is about me personally. Okay. It depends. I think that the question about traditional galleries, there's a difference between like a commercial gallery where you're selling artwork and a space that would be accommodating of like conceptual contemporary art. So if a traditional gallery space like a museum really wanted to support like conceptual art, it probably would be safe because but the whole point of me doing this exhibition here is the fact that I have not had those types of institutional experiences, so it's kind of hard to say. But in like a commercial gallery, like this would not be something that someone would walk in and like want to buy, and I don't tend to make work like that. And so, but in talking about like this, is it like a safe space for my work? I would say that one of the reasons why I haven't made like commercial work or work for sale in a more traditional way is because that like the impetus behind the commercial sales is often to find a way to package you as an artist and often as an entertainer. Like this is, you are, it's almost like an actor in a film. Like often people will go to see a film based on how much they like that actor. And so they become a product. In my biography, you heard that I resist that. I am not a product. I am not a ticked box. You're not going to package me and sell me. So this is why I tend to resist those kinds of commercial spaces. That's not to say I would never exhibit there or make work for a space like that if I thought that I had the right relationship with the folks who were running a space like that. Yeah. Another question?
Does anybody in the room have things? Okay. Someone asked, and this was just based on the descriptions of your work. As the artist, do you want people to get it? Is legibility ever your goal?
Oh, that's such a great question. Okay, and before I answer that, I'm curious if anybody here is or felt like there were things about this exhibit that didn't feel legible or felt like really weird, or like did you have any discomfort thinking I don't get this? Or did it just give me some reactions? I'd like some reactions. We need the microphone. We need the microphone.
I'm turning.
Okay.
So for me, it wasn't that it doesn't work, but for me, one of the things that happens when I go to an art installation, and not just like a couple paintings and then there are other paintings by another artist, but something that's a lot of stuff by one artist. Part of it is just trying to, in my head, get a feel for what the story is. And I think that's kind of like it's a process, so it's never immediate, but you kind of have to sit for a while, you look at it. There are parts of it that draw you in immediately, but then it's like, oh, well, what are these other pieces? How do those tie in? And so I don't know that it's illegible, but I feel like I'm still listening and looking and getting a feel for it.
Yes.
And I think some of the poster on the back with the
statement?
Yes.
My exhibition statement.
I thought was also, then you start thinking about that and how things tie together. So I'm still on a journey, I guess.
Yes, and that's such a good point because the journey to kind of address this question, if you want to like maybe just set it, or yeah, you can. The question of wanting to make things legible and like easy to understand. So there's kind of two parts here. The journey part to make this an experience, that's part of why I want to be an installation artist and like give people an experience. When I do make smaller work, one of the things that I think about is the possibility that people can go back to the same image, the same artwork, and see new things in it, or to make new connections after they've read the statement or looked at other pieces in the exhibition, so that over time, like, you will continue to be rewarded if you have some patience and sit and take the time to look and kind of let it sink in and think about it. So I want to kind of put a pin in that for a second, because I would like to address the topic of mindfulness in a minute. But first, we're talking about this legibility thing. So I think that learning about art, it's sort of like learning a new language. So at some point, you will feel like more fluent, but because art is not like a written language where you can just read it and then immediately understand the words because you know the meaning of the words, you can make connections to interpret the artwork. But to me, there's no one interpretation that I'm intending, and that process, that journey of attempting to do the interpretation is kind of what I want, and there's no wrong answers. And as you're interpreting the artwork, you're bringing yourself into it. You are your own experiences, your own knowledge, the connections that you're making only come from you. So you have a very unique individual interpretation, and I love the idea that every single person that would look at my work would have a slightly different interpretation, because it's unique to themselves, and they're making connections with what they're seeing, but then also what's important in their own life, and whatever connections they have to make to things that they recognize maybe I didn't even intend. Like one time I had some images that I had a painting with some images of like corn, and then some other more, I guess you could say, like urban images. And the intention was not to write a story or convey a narrative about the urban and rural divide, but someone told me that that's what because their family is like a farming family, that's immediately what they saw and what they interpreted, and they were thinking about the boundaries. So they understood that larger theme in my work about boundaries and structures and even hierarchies, and they put that into their own experience and interpreted this narrative about the tension between urban and rural cultures. And that was super fascinating. And then to be able to have that conversation about what that person was thinking, I love that. And that's another reason why I keep doing what I'm doing, because I want to hear those perspectives and to hear those interpretations. And it just informs my practice more to hear when people are, what they're interpreting. And that allows me, and most artists, when you're getting feedback like that, that's how you know what you're making is even somewhat legible. So part of that question is like, is legibility ever the point and purpose? It is, to the extent that I want to work within like themes. I still want people to kind of understand like thematically the work, and I want it to feel cohesive. But I don't have one particular story or narrative that I want people to interpret. I want people to feel free to think and make essentially free associations, and come up with their own interpretations and narratives. So what did you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say something else, but what your kind of point about interpretation made me think of this little like excerpt that I show my students at the beginning of semester that my advisor passed down to me. It's basically this kind of thing, and I don't remember the author, something Berger, and he says, for any given text, let there be at least one plausible interpretation, or at least multiple interpretations, and at least one implausible interpretation. So I I think what that means is that there are multiple, right, plausible interpretations of a text, but there can also be implausible wrong interpretations. And it kind of, you kind of talked about how art is different from, or visual art is different from written text, right? Words, which have meanings, right? Which are
definitions.
There's like a certain, it's not infinite, right? The kind of the number of interpretations we can give to a sentence is not infinite. And I wonder if the same is true of visual art, whether there are wrong interpretations of visual art.
Yeah. I would say not wrong necessarily, but if I can frame it as like, is the work successful or unsuccessful? And how would an artist determine whether or not their art is successful and is ultimately like what they wanted and intended? So if, and it can be tough to have feedback to know whether or not like what people interpreted. I'm not a mind reader, so I don't know what, if their interpretation was wrong or not. So there, you have to try to find ways to figure out if your work was successful in the way that you wanted it. Was it executed in a way that sort of leads the viewers and the participants in the direction that you want? And that, for myself, it's so hard. It's so hard to know, because like if you write a text, you're not always talking to the reader, and so you don't know exactly if the reader is interpreting what you wanted to either. So that's part of the reason why I like to have conversations like this, because this is the most effective way for me to determine whether or not my work is successful. And as Lauren can attest, I have asked in the process of installing this installation, staff here, people who have been working with other artists and who have seen a lot of the behind the scenes process. When you look at my work, like, what are you seeing and what are you interpreting? And like, how did you, like, when you first saw it, like, what did you think? So I asked multiple people on the staff here these questions, and like, what, this, like, a particular symbol, what does this look like to you? And then when they tell me, then I know whether or not I'm kind of on the right track. And hopefully what they see is what other people will also see. And just as sort of a practical note, I did write an exhibition statement. So then I end up using written text to supplement the visual to help people, again, make a little bit more of an obvious guide of, the themes that I'd like people to think about. And then that will help people to make connections. Because if you are not really that familiar with a lot of contemporary art, conceptual art, how it quote unquote works, then the written text can be really, really helpful to look at that and just kind of get a starting point of like, okay, what theme should I be thinking about? And then you start making connections. So that's the thing that I feel like it tends to be really effective for folks who don't see as much contemporary art and conceptual art, is like to have something to read that has more of a specific definition. Like, okay, you gave me a set of rules here of like what I should think about. Great, this is what I'm looking for. Just like the sign on the wall. Okay, this tells me exactly what I can and can't do. Great, that's what I'm looking for. So trying to, and I know this is said a lot, but try to meet people where they're at. Like, that there's going to be different people with different experiences. Who might be intimidated. So like, how can I make sure that there's something there that people can kind of grasp onto at first, and then use that as a bit of an anchor and not feel like they're just floating around, I don't even know where to start thinking. So that's part of my technique for doing that. Any other questions? Any other? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the things that you said that really resonated with me was how part of it is like an understanding of your own interpretation and like what that tells you about yourself. And I like that a lot, because I think my instinct when I come into these kind of places is like, I'm trying to figure out what the artist is trying to say. perspective, not being biased by what the artist is trying to say, but like, what does this tell me about like my thoughts or context or biases to like what I'm seeing here, and then you can bring in that and like get the value of both, how that helps you understand yourself, and then also what the artist is trying to say.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, because that's a practical point for anyone. Like, you can kind of go back and forth. Like, again, there isn't a right or wrong way to like start interpreting things. So, like you mentioned, I like to look at the artwork, and then see what did the artist say about it, and how did they title it, and so then therefore, like, what was their closer idea of what their intention was. But that process of going back and forth of, let me look first and make my own interpretation, and then bring in some more clues from the artist or even the curator, because sometimes there'll be like a curatorial statement, those kinds of things. That whole process, to me, is what's really enjoyable about experiencing art. It's not just, well, let me stand in front of something and see if I can figure it out. It's the whole experience of where, how am I moving through this exhibition? Even if it's not an installation like this, it's just, I went to a museum and there was several paintings in a row. Often, like, the curator will have some intention, and they want you to make connections across these works of art. So you can look at each one individually, but then stand back and look at them as a group, and what kind of connections do you make with these as a group? And so sometimes curatorial choices can be really interesting and enlightening, about how you can interpret a work and how you can start making connections between the works. So any other questions? Did you have some online questions?
Okay. Someone wanted to know what risks or experiments you took in creating this piece in this space.
What risks? It was very risky having other people climb up on a ladder for me. So part of the, can you read the question again? What kind of risks or experiments
did you take in creating this piece in this space?
Okay, so I'll start with more of the experimental question. I like to experiment within some of the things that I already know, by which I mean, specifically, I like to use textiles. I have not used textiles in this large of a space with this size of installation. So that, like, experimenting to see how can I, what I call, sculpt a space. I've never had this size of space to be able to sculpt with textiles in it. What does that even mean? To sculpt with textiles, that's the experiment. How do I do it? What can I bunch up and make shapes and forms? How can I respond to a space that already exists and use its already existing architecture, especially because this isn't a white-walled gallery or museum where it's easy to just like hammer some nails into the wall. Responding to these design problems essentially as if they're math problems, not problems in a negative way, but like, okay, they're problems that require some kind of solution, some kind of design solution. And so I came in here not with any sort of blueprint of exactly how I wanted things to hang and where I wanted them to go. It was really intuitively responding to the space, and so that's all entirely experimental. But I'm able to make intuitive decisions because I have had a lot of practice, like, with these materials, thinking about my thematic work, what's going to be cohesive with all the work that I've made in my entire like career, my body of work. So for people who might other creatives who are thinking like, how do I have an experimental practice? You can kind of set yourself some limitations to experiment within, some of those boundaries, because the boundaries have to exist in order to break them. So if you're thinking about how do I question boundaries, how do I push boundaries, well, you have to know kind of where those boundaries are, and it could be in an artistic sense, like materials or images. Like I personally have what I call a vocabulary of images that I tend to use over and over in a lot of the work that I do. So then I experiment with those things to see how can I use them in different ways to guide the viewer to think about certain themes and ideas and make certain types of interpretations. So in terms of risks, I'm not 100% sure how to answer about risks. I think just making any art at all is kind of a risk, because this is not something that a lot of folks thinks is productive. Like, shouldn't you be doing other work that makes you more money, that contributes something more to the economy and therefore society? So being very determined and steadfast in my choices to make art at all, and to make art again that's not something that's going to be purchased, that I'm not going to make money off of, that's not profitable. That in itself is a risk, because there's so many other choices I could make, so many other things I could be doing, but I choose to do this in an economic environment that screams at me that I probably should not, but I do it anyway. So that's I think the biggest risk that I'm taking. Yeah. Any other things to share? Yeah.
I was wondering if you could effectively work in like smell or taste or those kind of senses here, if like what that would be, and whether you have an answer to that or not. Could you also describe the soundscape that you had mentioned? Because I'd like to.
Yeah. And definitely after we're done here, I can turn that on. And so folks who are here, which is why it's nice to have people in person so they can experience a little bit more of what the installation has to offer. But so the soundscape is a mix of suggestions of types of music. And the title of this installation being Diffusion, it's not simply about things dispersing and specifically like people dispersing around the world, migration and human movement through the generations. But what happens after that diffusion happens when people are migrating and moving to different places. And even now, to bring in the technology component again, you don't necessarily have to physically move to a different place. You can discover new places, new things, new people in online communities by researching different places around the world. Like we have so much more exposure to other places and the identity of other places and what it means to make a place. What is placemaking? What defines and what are the boundaries around a place, like Big P place? How is that identified? So the soundscape is meant to question that a little bit, like what are the boundaries of place? And so when, again, like I said, when what happens after people diffuse and they end up in a new place? Often fusion happens. So we have diffusion and then fusion, because once you're in a place, like you become a part of what defines that place, just your very existence. Now you're a person in that place. The people in that place define what that place is, what the character, what the cultural makeup is of that place is. So by definition, wherever you are, you're fusing with anyone else there, with the culture there, with the society there. Even if you feel like an outsider, well, the idea of like outsiders coming in, and then once they're here, like everyone else reacting to this outsider, that's social activity that's happening, and social activity is culture. That's how we build culture. It's alive. It's not static. It's always building and living. So that fusion is constant, and the soundscape is kind of a fusion of musical styles, like hints at musical styles, to kind of obviously. I hope in kind of an obvious way, you can hear the fusion happening, and because it's sound and it's not static, it's going, it's looping over and over. It's like hearing fusion in real time. And so you can have that kind of experience. That's another layer, another component that just points to this idea of fusion. And then the other part, you were asking about taste and smell. So were you asking like specifically in this installation how I might add to it? That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I love the idea of spices, somehow incorporating spices. I also often in installations, as some folks can see, I have things that are like on the floor. And I would love to have like big piles of spices on the floor. So, I would have to be a really large volume, a large quantity, I think, in order to smell anything. But I remember there was an installation, I think probably somewhere in New York. I just read about it, but there were these pedestals in the middle of the space, and I think it was some kind of like vegetables. Yes, it was vegetables, and then it was a whole installation. Like, I don't remember exactly what the other components were, but the point was that you start to look at these objects, these vegetables, as like art objects, and so you're sort of making connections and like interpreting these food items as like art. But then the viewers were invited, maybe at the opening or at some point during the run of the exhibition. They were invited to together take the vegetables, cut them up, make a salad, and then like communally eat this food. And so maybe that's a way of like incorporating taste in some way, where like the actual pieces of the installation are then something that you take down, take off, eat. Yeah, that's I like that you bring this up. So I'm now thinking, I'm generating. You're seeing me generate in real time. This is amazing. Yeah, this is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation. So yeah, good question. I like that a lot. Awesome. Any more? There.
This person asked, what is your favorite or most rewarding part of your process and why?
Most rewarding. Okay, well, I'll kind of start with favorite first, because I like looking for materials. And so I like to be able to go and touch things and just dream of like, what could I do with this? So just finding something that gives me a little spark, a little hint of inspiration. I think that's kind of my favorite thing. Just dreaming up possibilities, like the food, because in a dream, in my inspirational, mind, anything is possible. And then once I start executing it, then you run into the limitations and you realize, okay, well, maybe that's not going to work. So, yeah, the dreaming up of things and envisioning things is really great. And so, like in this particular installation, the fact that I had to discover the design challenges that this architecture and this building posed, and then I had to come up with solutions for that, and we tried to come up with solutions as a team. I love that. That's why I'm an installation artist, because I want to find ways of using space, and there's always going to be quirks and limitations to different spaces, and figuring that out, how to execute my vision while solving the design challenges is super satisfying and super rewarding. So that's my favorite part and the most rewarding part. Yeah, let's just do a few, just to keep some of the online questions running.
Okay. Do you have a message to artists who don't feel like they've made it yet?
You're never gonna make it. Yeah, I don't know exactly what it means to make it. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to a group of people in a gallery who have come to look at my installation. Is that making it? Is being financially stable through your artwork making it? Because I'm not, so maybe I haven't made it. I think you have to define for yourself what it means to be successful, what it means to make it. And so if you feel like you haven't made it yet, then these are really practical questions of like almost making like a business plan. I mean, it really, if you want to be an artist long term, you have to kind of think of yourself as an independent business, like a sole proprietorship, and do some of the things that independent businesses do, like freelancers do, and stuff, and start learning some of those techniques. And for instance, I don't have social media, and I think a lot of people would be surprised, like how do you not promote yourself on social media? Like it's so crucial and so it's so necessary. And maybe this is why I haven't made it, because I haven't promoted myself in that way. I don't know. Like, but that's a very conscious choice that I've made. So you have to think about what is important to you if you're thinking long term. Like, what am I going to be most comfortable with? And then making a plan, like and finding good justifiable reasons for why you make the choices that you do. So I would start with good planning, and I have done that kind of through trial and error. It's not like I had some kind of advisor. I did go to art school, so I don't know this person who's asking if what kind of educational experience they have in the art space, but it can be helpful to find some advisors in a formal type of space, but otherwise the whole internet is out there. So looking for advice on like having a really like simple business plan and building from there is how that's the advice I would give. Yeah.
Two more. How many different techniques are you using in this work?
Techniques. Oh, you want me to define techniques? Oh man, that's a big question, because it kind of it is a question that's asking about like the boundaries of what is painting, like. And when I was in school, they told me that what I do isn't painting. So, and I was technically getting a painting degree, and they were like, maybe we don't give you a degree. And I was like, no, you give me a degree. So, but techniques, like I guess in a way, this might not be a satisfying answer, but I would say a lot. And I say that because my practice is meant to like incorporate a lot of different ways of sort of thinking through the design challenges. So you have to have knowledge of a lot of different ways of constructing things. So these are, when I'm thinking about techniques, I'm thinking about, well, how to sew. Not every artist is going to know how to sew, in addition to knowing how to paint or how to work with any other particular type of materials. One of the really good things about going to art school is you learn how to use a lot of different types of tools. This is one of the things that if you want to convince your parents or someone to support you going through art school, guess what? You will learn a lot of really practical skills. You will get into a wood shop. You will get into a metal shop. You can take classes to learn about ceramics and textiles, and you can learn a lot about like really practical work with tools that is applicable to a lot of different things in life. So a lot of my friends have come to me to repair things. So yes, you get some really practical skills that way. So it's definitely hard to define the number of techniques, because it's just like skills that I have now that I can just like automatically deploy. And learning a lot of different techniques is what has allowed me to envision, like when I was saying that one of my favorite things is having a spark of inspiration when I see a particular type of material. The reason why I can like generate ideas is because I can look at it and think about what are the tools that I have, what are the skills that I have, what can I do with this because of all the things that I already kind of like have practiced and the skills that I've formed, so I can generate those ideas. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then one more from online.
Yeah, that was a really good answer to a very big question. This one feels contentious to me for some reason. What's the point of consuming high art, and how is it applicable for everyday life?
High art. Well, then we have to define what high art is. Yeah. Actually, I would like if anyone has any ideas, like what do you think high art is? When someone says this, what are you envisioning? What do you think high art is? Does anyone have any ideas?
That's hard to answer because it's in each person's mind. What might be, oh my God, might be like, seen that before. You know what I'm saying? So, what is high art? Just because you pay $1 million for it, that doesn't mean it's high art. I think a lot of people don't realize that the Mona Lisa probably is what it is because it's so old, not necessarily that it's beautiful in everybody's eyes. Let me say it that way.
Yeah.
It may be more of age. So, yeah, like you said, it's hard to say, you know, something, the stick on the ground may be more high end to me than
the painting,
the textiles, like you said.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
If you saw me, I was looking at it, trying to figure out what you used and how you manipulated the pieces together because some of them I realized were cut and some of them I still
it's
ain't
mysterious.
sure.
Yeah.
Right. So what is high end? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Even though you might not want to sell it, somebody might come in here and say, I want all of this. How much is it going to cost me? And I want you to come put it up in my house. And I want it to look exactly the same way. And when you get there, they got a flat roof or a ceiling falling off, you know, but they still want it to look like this. So, you know, and you may not get it that way, or you may, and it might be high end to them.
Yeah.
You know? So that's a hard.
Yeah. That's a good point. And I wanted to jump off what you said about how, you know, like the stick on the ground could be high art to someone. So context, how objects are contextualized is what tells us what art is and is not, essentially. So when I was saying that there was that exhibition with the food, the vegetables on pedestals, when we put something up on a pedestal, all of a sudden, this is an object that we need to admire. So it's like those choices, those like curatorial choices, artistic choices, is what indicates to us. This is the context that informs us. Like, art is happening, and now we have to be more mindful because this is an art object, as opposed to just it was something that I saw at the grocery store. And so that means that literally anything could be a work of art because we put it in the right context. We put it in a museum. This is a lot of like what pop art was sort of about. If that's a good reference point for people. Like I can make an image of a Campbell's soup can, an everyday item, and it can be art. Was there something else you wanted to say?
Yeah, high end can also be, for me, my high end with this exhibition is more emotional because I'm going through some things outside. And when I came in and saw certain pieces, don't take it wrong, I wanted to cry. It might not be crying for what you think I'm crying for. There may be something else on the side of me dragging me, and that just maybe made me think of something in relations to that might open up my eyes to a different thought.
Yeah.
You know, like I was just sitting here saying, I'm gonna have to come to GR stuff a little bit more often because like I was saying, you know, I'm going through a change in life, let's put it that way, and I'm trying to find myself, you know, coming in here just looking. I'm like, I have not done this in so long. It's been so many years. I've dabbled, but this just gets me pumped up.
Yeah.
Maybe I should find something more to get into as far as using my hands as a tool instead of just walking around with my hands at my side.
Yeah.
So when you talk about, somebody asks you something about what you use or what is in your mind or what, you're used to this, but for somebody who hasn't seen this stuff.
Right.
Let me not say stuff. Hasn't been around art in a while. I haven't been to a gallery in a while. This just makes me realize there's more to life. You know, I need to open up my mind a little bit more. That's more of a high end for me, to open up my mind to more things in the world than just walking around, I guess.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, go ahead, Becca.
I just want to, just circling back to what we were talking about interpretation, I had this thought and I wasn't able to put it into words and you did, so I'm gonna kind of answer my question from earlier about interpretation. I think what makes visual art or art different from a text that wasn't written with an artistic purpose is because I think people bring in their emotional experiences and their emotional states and give a piece an interpretation that no one might have, right? And that is a valid interpretation of the text, but it might be unique to that person just because of their unique emotional state and their circumstances.
Yeah, and I love the idea that artwork would inspire emotions, that you would feel, arrested enough that like, oh, I feel like having an outpouring of emotions, and I might even cry, like, and in some ways, that it makes me feel so much more connected to you, to the space, to the work that I've created. Because do you think I haven't cried? Like, it's being so overwhelmed by like the work that's so hard and so risky, and thinking about like, do I keep doing this when it's quote unquote not productive? So yeah, I really love that kind of response, and the fact that any work that I do could generate emotions like that this is how I know that, okay, this is successful, and this is rewarding, and this is something that has been in terms of like, have I made it? Like, does it mean for me? Yeah, that's what it means for me, that anyone would come in and feel such a strong draw and be engaged in such a way that it elicits those kinds of emotions. Like, that's super rad and like awesome. And so that's super cool. But to kind of pick up on some of these threads, one of the practical suggestions that I wanted to give, and maybe we can kind of like close on this topic if there isn't like a lot more questions and stories to share, but I wanted to bring up the idea of mindfulness. So for folks who are thinking, how do I engage with contemporary art? Maybe it's something, it's their definition of high art, like things that are less legible, that it feels like you need to have more art historical knowledge to understand. If you don't feel like you have all of the visual vocabulary, if you're not as fluent, think about engaging with art as a mindfulness practice. Notice your own noticing. So what do you notice? Do you notice a color? Do you notice a texture? What is something that you have become drawn to? Or maybe it's not even something that you like. Maybe it's something you dislike. You notice there was something that rubbed you the wrong way. That I don't like this artwork. But notice that intentionally, deliberately, and mindfully, and try to figure out why. Why do I like this? Why do I not like this? You're not trying to figure out what did the artist intend. You're not trying to read anyone's mind. You're simply practicing a type of patience, which is a skill that we need to exercise. It's just like exercising a muscle. And art spaces often are very safe spaces to do that. When we practice more patience and more mindfulness, it's a practical skill that can help with like conflict when you're in spaces where there's tension and friction. Those are moments where it's difficult to practice mindfulness and to exercise that skill. So when you are in a calm moment, and when you come to see some art, and the art isn't going to jump off the wall and start yelling at you, probably, then this is where you get that exercise. And again, it's not about trying to figure out what the artist intended. So you do it for yourself as a practice, as an exercise. And we have got a train coming through. And I hope that's not too loud on the live stream. But yeah, so these are the ways that I think that art can be very used in a very practical way in people's lives. And so maybe, again, to address this question of like the high art, like what's the purpose? Whether the art is high art or low art or anything in between, if you are using it in a practical, functional way, then that's what matters to you. Like no one can tell you this is how you should interpret the work. This is how you should use it. But if you think about it in that way, like this could be part of a lifelong, larger mindfulness practice, and you can hone that skill by looking at art, then it doesn't matter what the art is. It's just that you looked at the art and you did it in a mindful way, and you practiced that. So yes, that's my practical advice about let's all look at more art. Amen. Any other questions, stories, anything you want to share? I am so happy that you guys are here. Yeah, well.
Hello, friends. Okay. We're having a poetry event on the 21st. That we have notebooks here you can stop by during gallery hours. We're open tomorrow and Sunday from 12 to 4, Monday from 4 to 6, and then Tuesday we're going to come back. Folks took their journals to do homework here at North Star. Our folks love homework, even though we're not a classroom. We're coming back on the 21st to do poems, to hear other people's poetry inspired by the work. So we hope you'll attend that, and we'll have food, and it'll be fun.
And it's the last opportunity
It is.
to see the show, so come and enjoy.
Yeah, it's our closing event. We hope to see you there. And that's it for me, but you can absolutely keep asking questions. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you, GR.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so did you have another comment you wanted to share? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was just I like the way you used color, because there's a lot of organic color and organic textiles, and then there are more sort of artificial seeming colors,
Sort of
and
synthetic.
synthetic textiles too. And I like, I guess it goes with the fusion. And then I know you have an interest in like sort of archaeology and time and like things building on top of each other, and so it reminded me of that as well.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so one word that I like to think about is multiplicity. So the layers, I mean, physically I have layers of textiles, and so that's one of the techniques I use, like, okay, let's think about layers and how things are layered and layered through time, or the layers of the things that happen in our lives. Like that's one way that you can conceive of like experiences, is things that just gets layered on top of each other, and then they kind of like all meld and fuse together. But a lot of contemporary and conceptual art is intended to have a multiplicity of meaning, which is, to go back to this conversation of interpretation, like this is one of the reasons why different interpretations are all valid, because one symbol doesn't just have one definition or one meaning. It can have, it is intended to have many different meanings. Therefore, you can make many different types of connections to all the different images and materials and things that you see and experience. And then that's kind of what defines more of the contemporary type of art is the practice of creating things that have this kind of like layered multiplicity of meaning. So I keep using this term conceptual art, contemporary art. How does that define, and how is that different from like modern art with a big M? We use this term modern. That sounds like a synonym to contemporary, but in the art world, modern and contemporary are two different types of art. And then you have all these art movements throughout history. So someone brought up the Mona Lisa. In that time period, a certain image might mean a certain thing, and that might be more of a almost like text type of reading of a painting. You might actually need to have some of that background knowledge to know that, oh, this symbol, one of the more commonly known is like a skull. Some historical paintings, a lot of still lifes will incorporate a painting of a skull, which is called a memento mori. And so it's like, okay, that specifically was a symbol to like remind people of like human mortality. Folks would know that looking at paintings like that. So that's had less of a multiplicity of meaning, and so that defines that type of artwork. And contemporary and conceptual art tends to be defined by this idea of more free-flowing interpretations and that multiplicity. So just to define that a little bit, since I keep using those terms. Yeah. Anything else?
I guess one like framing or assumption that I have, and feel free to correct if it's not right, but about like coming into a project like this is there's kind of like a spectrum of how you approach it, from like blank slate at one side to like very distinct, crisp vision of what you're trying to do. And I guess for this, where did you fall in that spectrum? And maybe as you went through it, how much did it change?
Yeah, that is a good question. So when I first was applying to be a part of this exhibition series, I was looking through some older artwork that I had, and a lot of these paintings of the masks I've had for many years. So, but they've never been installed in this type of configuration. So then I was thinking, my work in particular is modular. I make a lot of pieces that can be reconfigured in different ways in different spaces to adapt to different spaces. So this is how I can start conceiving of installations, is like, what pieces do I have that can maybe fit a space and be combined and recombined and reconfigured. And I often do work that it doesn't have a particular orientation, meaning there isn't an up and a down. So they can be turned every which way. The masks have a little bit more. It's obviously like, okay, there's the top and the bottom. But I've exhibited paintings where literally it's masks, but they're upside down. They're turned on the side. And so the way the images are oriented really affects how people interpret what the meaning is. Again, it's sort of that context. Like, in this context, if something looks like it's upside down, what does that mean? Like, why would this image be upside down? So I kind of started with the thinking about the masks, like where could these mask pieces go? I was working on this other piece that's in this smaller gallery that was in progress, and because there's branches, the live stream I don't think can see it, but they're branches put together in almost like a bird's nest kind of shape. So my original conception was to have something like that, but on a bigger scale in the center of this space. And you don't see it here because that was kind of unrealistic. And so that's how so part of the process changed, was like once I got in and started seeing more of the details of how things could actually physically be hung in this space. But I knew that I wanted to use more branches, so that informed some of the decisions about materials. And then figuring out, I always am going to use textiles because this particular space is so wonderful with the exposed beams and the high ceilings. Like, how can I really take advantage of that? And so I had conceived of somehow hanging textiles up high from the ceiling, and I didn't have any specific idea of exactly how it was going to look in the end, and as Lauren can sort of attest, like we were in the middle of hanging things, and I started ripping. Well, I asked for help ripping pieces of fabric, and that became a fun activity, because who gets to just like freely rip yards and yards, like 100 feet of fabric. But so we started ripping a bunch of fabric, and I created this braid of fabric And that was a decision that I made in the moment when I started to see all of the textiles I was laying out in this space, and I thought, okay, I need to have something that feels like a texture, like all of these things are kind of smooth and flowing. So what can I do to add something that has a little bit of this that shows sort of like the texture of this material. And I like to emphasize that the material is important. And so it's one of the reasons why I leave the edges of paintings like frayed and unhemmed, because paintings often you don't think about the canvas, you don't think about the wood that the canvas is stretched on. It's immaterial, ironically, to your interpretation of the images that you're seeing. And for me, if I'm thinking about, well, how do I break some of the boundaries, like the images, the paintings, they're so contained by like a painting, like the canvas and the wood frame. Well, let me take it off of a wood frame, and let me make it look not so neat. And this particular material, this is called muslin. It's like the cheapest material you could like get, and it's often used for mocking up pieces of like clothes. So for those of you who don't know, I attended fashion school and learned how to like sew things. And this is the kind of material that you use to make mock-ups of the clothing that you want to make. And it's super duper cheap. But if the cheapness means that sometimes it doesn't cut smoothly. And so some of these, they don't hang perfectly straight, but to me, that's honoring the material that I found. I want to honor my materials. I don't want to fight with them. And I want people to know that this material is important. And so instead of making it look so perfect, like it just appeared there, like an artist didn't have a hand in making it, I feel like that's often the experience. You go into a gallery and here's this like perfectly rendered painting, or here's a picture on the wall, and you don't necessarily see like the artist's hand. I'm trying to infuse a little bit of like my humanity in there, which is flawed and imperfect. So I'm sort of giving permission for people to be flawed and imperfect. Look, the art is quote unquote flawed and imperfect, and it's okay. And so I'm making meaning that way. I'm making very, very deliberate, considered choices about how I'm presenting the work so that the material becomes important, and it's not just the images. And so I can do that by taking the material away from the wall, and I can hang it off the ceiling. But then if there's something that is hanging almost like a traditional painting, the material is still important because, like you said, Kane, like it's been manipulated in some way, and like how has it been manipulated? And even that word manipulated, like it indicates that someone has done something, like with the materiality of the piece. And that's another thing that defines contemporary art often is the materiality, where the materials are very important and not just the images. And so if to get a little more academic here, often the way that you can interpret the things that you see in contemporary and conceptual art is by thinking about how it references, whether it's an image or material, how do these things reference its own history? So what is the history of textiles? Where do they come from? And basically you're going back, if you keep thinking about it, it's back to the dawn of humanity. Like, what were the first humans doing with textiles? How do they even conceive of a textile? Like deciding to weave something and to create, and what would it have been for protection, for to keep yourself warm? Like, so then you start asking all these questions about why were these materials created? And this is part of what it means to like honor the material, is to think about what its purpose was and has been throughout like all of human history. And so ultimately, if you keep going back and you keep going back and you keep going back and you think about like what were these items used for, and you can start thinking about the activities, the rituals, all these things that build like humanity and society and culture. this is all the fusion that happens. Like this is how I try to direct people to these particular themes, this journey, thinking about human movement and migration. So I went from one place to another, and I encountered new kinds of materials and new kinds of activities and new kinds of behaviors, and what did we do with those things? And all of that makes meaning when you're looking at and experiencing and partaking in an installation like this, because every single thing references like its own history. Where did it come from? And why is it here now? Someone brought it here. Me, the artist, I brought it here. But you can start asking those questions and get to thoughts about infrastructure. What kind of infrastructure helps an artist to bring this stuff to this space? And what kind of systems do we have that support arts or don't? What are the systems of equality and inequality and injustice that we don't have more of this? So questions about systems, structures, infrastructure, society. These are all the things that over time, if you continue to like think about the work, come back to the work, investigate the work, sit with the work, like these are the questions that I hope people will be asking and thinking about. This is the multiplicity of meaning. These are the things that I try to integrate and fuse together in the work. So that's a lot of talk. Anything else? Any other thoughts? Anything to share? This has been so much fun, and I'm glad that you have been paying attention. Do we have any more online questions? Another thing I'll say is that you can acknowledge that you like something, you like an artwork that's not very good, and you can also acknowledge that you don't like an artwork that is considered very good. So the things that you like versus the things that you can appreciate, these are two different things. Hi there. We've got some potential visitors. That is one way to also try to like identify how to enter a work. Like, is this something that I'm liking and enjoying? And if it's not something that I like or enjoy, is it something that I can at least appreciate? Can I appreciate the work that the artist did, or can I appreciate that the infrastructure, the curator, whoever chose this for a reason? So art isn't just for like enjoyment and entertainment. And I think sometimes there's this expectation that we're just going to go into art spaces for enjoyment. And sometimes it's challenging. Sometimes art can be challenging. So in the same way that you might go to a movie theater and you decide, like, what kind of movie do I want to watch? What am I in the mood for? Like a rom-com or like a horror movie? And if you went into a movie thinking you were going to see a rom-com and it turned out to be a horror movie, you might be kind of disappointed. So it's like, if you're going to go see some art, understand that this particular exhibition, it might be just for the joy of it, and you're going to have joy. But then you go to another exhibition where it's more equivalent to like a hard-hitting political documentary, and you might be challenged. And sometimes that frustrates folks because they have one expectation and it turns out to be something else. So always make sure, this is another practical point, that you kind of have an idea. If you think that there's something in particular that you're looking for, an experience that you're looking for, I want, a joyous, enjoyable, entertaining, fun experience. Art is not always that. So just beforehand, know kind of what you're getting into. Just as a practical point. Yeah. And were there any other questions?
Just about where they can follow you online. GR doesn't have social media.
I do have a website.
GR has a website.
Artcultured.com. Yeah, because my name is too unwieldy for a URL. So artcultured with a D at the end.com.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, I guess we'll wrap it up. big thanks to all you for coming out and having a conversation. This was so wonderful. I'm so glad. And thanks to everyone who was watching through the live stream. So thank you all so much.